warning. This show features dark subjects which may be triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Chaos Jar. I'm J. West Secord, the loud and obnoxious one. Hey. Over here is our big bag of facts, Bad Ben.
Hey.
And, as always, that's all of us. So, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at BA Chaos Jar. You can follow us on Facebook at Chaos Jar Podcast, which is also the name of our YouTube channel. You can follow me at Twitter at I'm Glad You Asked _ And, probably send me some questions. Ask me stuff. Please, ask me stuff. I want people to ask me stuff. We got one question. One question, people. Ask me! Anyway, if you want to be a patron, you can go to patreon.com/chaosjar, give us a bit of money, and voila, you get early access to our bonus show, The Overflow. Plus, you can watch the episodes that are available on patreon.com, and you will be one of our executive producers where we send shoutouts to you. Woo! Whee! All that stuff and more. Now that all that's taken care of, check the show notes if you missed anything. Let's figure out what's going in the jar today.
Well, today we're going to talk about Dr. Crippen.
All right, that's our show. Have a good...
And done.
And cut.
All right. So, in today's day and age, it's not really that far-fetched to know that, like, wireless technology, like the internet and all that kind of stuff, cell phones help us solve crimes. Like,
right. I've watched Black Mirror.
Yeah. And they, like, subpoena, just look at the documentary for the Chris Watts case, which will be a case we probably will cover at some point later, but just in that documentary alone, they like go through a lot of like camera footage and they subpoenaed the things from their cell phones to see what conversations we're having and stuff like that. But we don't think about like wireless technology helping to solve crimes and apprehend people 100 years ago.
Well, why not? Was it just, were their cell phones just not that good back then?
Well, cell phones kind of came around in like the late 70s, early 80s, and then became popular in the 90s and 2000s. So I don't think 100 years ago that they had that much capability.
100 years ago, that was like 1821. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about.
I thought you were going to make like a pandemic joke and be like, that was like 2019.
I don't understand.
Because everything slowed down during the pandemic. Everything seems to drag. But I guess for us, like, not really, because
I don't know what you're talking about. And nothing's changed. Yeah. I haven't left my apartment since 2019. Is it okay outside? I
feel like there's a lot that you've missed. Too much for me to talk about on the show.
Yeah, apparently I missed the expansion of cell phones from the 1820s.
Now all I can picture is that you have like cells and call them like, and they're calling each other. Like, oh my lord!
My old cell phone was a dagger.
Yeah. You have two cans tied together.
Yeah.
What am I talking about? I talk to Secord all the time like this.
All right, I got a confession.
Yeah.
I've never actually seen Black Mirror.
Okay.
I was going to wait for the end of the episode to make that joke, but I knew I'd forget by the time that happened. So
it's funny because Black Mirror seems to be a theme for my day today. So everybody keeps mentioning it. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, everybody.
Like, I legit have not seen it. I'm aware of what it is, but yeah.
I've seen a couple episodes, but yeah.
The Black Mirror is about like screens. Like, you turn off a screen and the technology is black, so you see a reflection yourself. That's where the Black Mirror of that show is about, not the original origin.
Kinda. Like, so the show is more about, like, the dangers of our reliance on electronics and how dangerous it is that, electronics and AIs are getting.
Right.
Yeah.
Thus...
Yeah, the Black Mirror.
The Black Mirror of the screen. Yeah, fuck, I knew... Oh, sorry!
Yeah, like...
I was just trying to say what it meant.
Anyways.
Fuck!
So, about 100 years ago, an invention called the telegraph came out. And it was used to, like, broadcast signals in Morse code, which would be very long messages. And that kind of originated because, like, in the early BCs, before the Common Era...
early British Columbia.
Early British Columbia. Well, before Common Era, normally they would use things like beacon fires or drum beats or smoke signals to put things forward so that you knew what was happening, like, further away to get messages across instead of just sending off... because letters are so slow in that time.
Unfortunately, you'd have to rely on a letter if, a smoke signal can't travel a certain distance.
But it would almost be like flag signaling. So, like, a certain color or a certain signal, and then that would be repeated off with another one, and same thing with drum beats.
Oh, I see what you mean, like the chain of it.
Yeah.
I think I've seen things like that in television where they use, like, lights to sort of do that. But it's usually a signal for oncoming attack.
And so that's how it developed into, like, a telegraph thing, especially with drums, because drum beeps could mean a certain thing. So, like, if you heard a certain amount and then it got...
Drum beeps?
Drum beeps. Beeps. Yeah, drum beeps.
Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah.
I didn't know they had synthesizers back then.
Oh yeah, totally. But yeah,
back in 1820s.
So, there was two different types of, like, telegraphs that were invented. So, like, optical ones that used, like, high points of lights or low points of lights to, like, put forward a message. So, like, a darker color or a darker, dimmer light, or a more frequent light pattern.
How did they send that? I actually didn't know about that.
So they would have, like, a type of tower, and it would have a light at the top of it, and they could cover it with a shutter.
Oh, actually, I did know about that. Okay, yeah.
And it was kind of, like, early proposals were made by, like, a guy named Robert Hooke in 1684, but it was implemented, like, on an experimental level. And then
trying to catch Peter Pan.
Yeah, totally. Captain Robert Hooke.
No one knows his first name.
I know. And so it became a successful, like, network in 1793 in France, mostly. It eventually branched out into neighboring countries, but it kind of fell away when they developed actual, like, electrical telegraphs, which would allow you to have that, like, pitch or the beeps that we hear in Morse code. And Morse code was invented by, I forget his name, I think it's Charles Morse. But he invented...
He was a horse.
He was a horse.
Of course.
Yeah. So he invented this...
I heard he was Norse.
Uh,
His skin was a little coarse.
Oh, great. We're just gonna... We're in Dr. Seuss now.
And he drove a Porsche.
Okay. We're done now.
Shut the fuck up, Wes. Okay.
Yeah, I had it here, but okay. Oh no, his name was Sam Morse. So he was an American artist, and he kind of helped develop the Morse code, and he just got the name for it, and it used certain length of the beeps or the electrical signal to cause a message to go across, and that can be picked up thousands of miles away. So ships became recruited with this, and that actually helped with a lot of it. So when we think about these things helping to solve crimes, that was, at the time, very experimental.
I like Can we look at the beep texts, please?
Yeah. Now you see right here, this one's slightly longer, but this also is pretty short. It could be either.
Yeah. It says here, how would you like to meet up in a dark place? Stop.
Yeah. Or
stop.
So an argument can be made for the first person to ever be apprehended by like a wireless signal being John Towell, who was born in 1784. He started off working in like shops in London, and he worked at a number of businesses owned by Quakers for a lot of years, like just kept bouncing around. He actually joined the Religious Society of the Quakers, which is a very rough society.
Yeah, I've eaten the oats. I know what you mean.
He was eventually disowned from the Quakers because he had a relationship with a non-Quaker woman named Mary Freeman, and they ultimately got married and had 2 children. In 1814, he was charged with possessing forged banknotes, and this was a capital offense, so he could have the death penalty put on him, which that's kind of crazy to think about. But then there are countries where like they'll like in Malaysia they'll execute you for having drugs. It's a death penalty.
Jesus.
Yeah. So, he was mindful of this scandal, and the Quaker-owned bank that was going to charge him was opposed to the death penalty. So they tried to negotiate with him to be allowed to plead guilty to a lesser offense. And the result was that his sentence would be commuted to 14 years transportation to the colony of Sydney in Australia, which at the time was a normal thing. Like they would just, instead of killing you, they would send you to these colonies to try and work the land and make it a proper colony.
They would send you somewhere worse.
Yeah, which could basically be a death penalty because sometimes you didn't make it. Like,
it's Australia. I'm surprised people live there now.
Yeah, and then you think about the fact that you're sent there to do a 14-year stint, and then you're expected to risk your life to come all the way back after spending 14 years building this colony.
Yeah.
Like,
Jesus.
So he obtained his ticket to leave, and he prospered, and he opened the colony's first pharmacy and conducted numerous property and business ventures. His family joined him in Sydney in 1823, and he was set on really fixing his reputation. But he even became one of like the founding people in the Quaker community that was there in Australia. So like the first Quaker community. But he eventually returned to London in 1838, and his wife had suffered from tuberculosis and died at the end of the year. He employed a nurse called Sarah Lawrence, who changed her name to Sarah Hart to look after Mary. And despite having remarried, he began an affair with Sarah. So after his wife had died, he had an affair with her, even though he had remarried to another woman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out, if your wife died and you're sleeping with someone else, it's not really an affair.
Yeah.
No, he got married again. I see that.
Yeah. So the secret relationship with Sarah actually bore 2 children, and he installed 3 cottages in Salt Hill, and he paid £1 per week to maintain them, which, wow, like to think about that now, like that's really, really cheap. Like,
well, I would honestly, if I could pay the equivalence of our dollar in pounds and it only be a single pound per rent, I would be pretty happy.
To maintain 3 cottages per like £1 each, like okay,
yeah, Jesus.
In 1844, he was having...
I'm so sad about my living situation.
He was having severe financial problems. He bought 2 bottles of Scheele's prussic acid and a treatment, which was a treatment for varicose veins. And then on the 1st of January, 1845, he traveled to Salt Hill, where he poisoned Sarah while sharing a beer with her in the cottage, and she was found that evening.
Whoa. I know we were talking about speeding up things, but how did we just jump to the murder like
I know.
that? I feel like I blinked.
Yeah,
verbally.
This is more about him being the first one to be caught, like, by this. So, there was a man in distinctive Quaker dark clothing that had been observed to leave Sarah's house that night. Following the trail, they found that a person answering to his description had been caught at the train station, heading to Paddington Station in London. So the police immediately used a newly installed telegraph to send a message to Paddington, giving the particulars and desiring his capture. He is in the garb of a quacker, ran the message, with a brown quacker with a brown coat on, which reaches nearly to his feet. There was no Q in the alphabet of the two-needle instrument, so they called it a quacker.
What? Where is that? I need to see this. Quacker.
So
what? There's no.
Yeah.
They look out the window and there's a duck dressed as a Quaker. Do you think it's him? No, it seems too obvious.
So the clerk in Slough therefore spelt Quaker with a KWA, and Quacker was eventually understood, but only after several requests to repeat. I just imagine this poor girl would be like, excuse me?
Stop. Don't forget the stop.
Oh, stop.
Excuse me? Stop. Quacker. Stop. Are you a duck? Stop.
I'm looking for a duck. Stop. So, when the train reached Paddington, the man was followed from the platform by a sergeant of the railway police, William Williams.
I thought it was bad enough in a modern video game I just played. There was a character named Billy Williams, but to have Willie Williams is even better.
He followed him onto a new road omnibus, and Towell mistook him for the conductor and gave him 6D, which I'm guessing is their cents, for the fare. Towell then went to a coffee tavern, and later to a lodging house, all the while Williams was following him. Williams came the following morning with Inspector Wiggins of the Metropolitan Police, and they eventually arrested Towell in the nearby coffee.
I didn't know they were in Springfield.
Wiggins, not Wiggums.
Fine.
So, at his trial, his murky past history was revealed. His defense was handled by Sir Fitzroy Kelly, who tried to make a case that the prussic acid that killed Sarah Hart was ingested accidentally from eating the pips of apples. The implausibility of this argument basically was like just the only thing that killed this case, that it's not possible for her to have accidentally poisoned herself.
Pips?
So like the pits.
Oh, the pit. Oh,
we call
I
it
see.
pits, but it'd be pips.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he is convicted at the Aylesbury courthouse and hanged in public on the 28th of March, 1845. This is what I mean by like when we take a look at any of these older cases, how fast they are to kill these guys. Like there's no appeal at all.
Yeah. In all fairness, though, there's probably a lot of innocent people who were also killed too,
yes.
Because it was just honestly everything came down to the trial of public opinion.
Yep.
Like one person says, "Hey, this person's bad," and then you get a mob mentality, and voila.
So there was a huge crowd that watched, and a written confession was handed to the jailer, but was never publicly released, leading to a lot of unconfirmed rumors of his guilt or innocence. So whether or not he actually killed them or not. So I talk about that case because the fact that it's an older case that really like exemplifies that this technology has evolved a long way.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he was caught by a newly installed telegraph in the 1800s, we don't think about that very often. So
it's when you think about it, it makes sense though, because like the greatest tool in wars that came out was communication. The minute we could communicate with our troops across the way, wars became significantly one-sided after that point. And, like, it's the same thing with this type of thing. The minute communication comes in, it's an amazing tool.
Yeah. So, Dr. Haller Harvey Crippen was born in Coldwater, Michigan, to Andres Skinner, who died in 1909, and Myron Augustus Crippen, who was born in 1827 and died in 1910. And he was a merchant, so he sold things. Crippen studied at the University of Michigan Homeopathic Medical School, so he's not like a medical doctor, he's a homeopathic medical doctor. So
that sounds like an oxymoron to me.
Yeah.
So, him peddling his snake oil and all that.
Basically. So he graduated from Cleveland Homeopathic Medical College in 1884. He had a first wife named Charlotte who died in 1892 of a stroke. He entrusted his parents. Crippen entrusted his parents living in California to care for his 2-year-old son, Holly Otto Crippen. So he named him, like, these names are so weird. Haller Harvey and Holly Otto.
I feel like that's a garage around the corner.
Yeah.
Come to Holly Auto and get your new wheels set up for the winter today.
So, having qualified as a homeopath...
I didn't know he killed people.
Yes. Crippen started a practice in New York, where in 1894 he married his second wife, Corinne Cora Turner, who performed under a stage name of Belle Amour. She was... neither of these names, like Corinne, Cora, even the last name Turner, or Belle Amour, none of them are even close to her real name. Her real name, and I'm going to fucking butcher it, is Kunigund Makamotsky.
Where is it? Kunigund
Makamotsky.
I think you actually said it right.
Yeah.
Unless that's supposed to be Kunigunde, but that doesn't sound German.
No, or Polish. Like,
it says German, right? Yeah.
She was born to a German mother and a Polish-Russian father.
Polish-Russian?
Yes.
That sounds like an oxymoron.
So, she was a would-be music hall singer. So, first she tried to be an opera singer, and she just did not have the voice for it. And so then she tried to be a hall singer. So, like, go to a ball hall or something like that, or a music hall.
A ball hall?
Yeah, so where they have... Never mind. Anyways. You're going a whole different way. So, anyways, she tried to do this, and she didn't even have the talent for that. From what I read, she really had no talent. And even when she managed to get gigs, she never held on to them for very long.
Tone deaf?
I'm guessing she just thought that she might have the ability to sing and just didn't at all.
Oh, sure. So she wasn't actually that good a singer,
yeah.
But like she was praised so much that she's like, no, my mommy thinks I am, so yeah.
And
I actually met people like that.
And Dr. Crippen, like her husband, was very devoted to this career of hers. Like, spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time, did a lot of her negotiations, tried to do all these things. Which is very odd, because she openly had affairs on him. Openly. Just fucking as many people as she could.
I at this point, I think he's a con artist, and she's the snake oil in this story.
In 1894, Crippen started working for Dr. Moyen, a homeopathic pharmaceutical company. So, a company that sells snake oil.
Yeah. Of course. I just got to stop for a second and say, at the beginning of this, we got a lot of really nice normal names.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm losing track of these names faster than I do when I watch a foreign television series.
So what I will do is, for simplicity, Belle Moore, we'll either refer to her as Belle Moore or as Cora. And mainly I'll refer to her as Cora because that's what a lot of the things say. Like Cora Turner is the name that she goes by.
Mm.
And Dr. Crippen essentially mostly just goes by Dr. Crippen no matter what.
Yeah, there was that doctor you just mentioned, too.
Dr. Moyen.
Yeah.
So, in 1897, Crippen moved to England with his wife, which basically meant that his qualifications as a homeopathic doctor are useless because the UK didn't have anything for that. They don't really have any reliance on homeopathic medication, or didn't at the time. They were more about medical doctors. So by moving there, he literally had no career.
Why is homeopath not as seen there?
Because of the fact that it's not really a medical thing. It's all about using herbs, and like you put a substance into the sea and then it comes back this other side to retain the attributes of that substance.
Right.
So
and he was coming from
America.
Oh, okay. Now that makes a lot more sense. Because is the States where most homeopath kind of started?
Yeah, it's got a lot, like there's a lot of links to it, and because of the fact that there was so much expansion with the States, like with the territories becoming states and stuff and moving westward and regaining new territory, doctors weren't always readily available. So like the best analogy to it is that in the States, something that's 100 years old is considered old, but in like England, something that's an hour drive away is considered a long drive. Because in the States, driving somewhere far has to be like 3, 4, 5 hours. But if you drive 3, 4, 5 hours, you can cross almost the entire island in England. So,
I never actually. Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah, because it's not a giant place, but there's a lot of population and a lot of industrialization there.
So what you're saying is because there weren't as many doctors and it was such a wide place, you had to learn to find more natural remedies off the land and everything.
Yeah.
And I assume it was not with any sort of negative intent, but I assume the natives also added to that as well, because that was a big part of their society.
Yeah, and with that as well, there was a lot of peddlers. So, like, people who would claim that this tonic that you drink will fix you right on up.
I wish we didn't use the snake oil thing so soon.
Well, it's funny
There's just
because
so much snake oil.
It's funny because one of the things that he did sell with Dr. Moyen was a type of chemical that was essentially just sugar and alcohol.
Oh, Jesus.
So
sorry about that tangent. Let's get back to our original story here.
As Crippen continued working, he did become a distributor of patent medicines. So he did manage to find a job, I guess, kind of in the pharmaceutical field, but nothing that really used his qualifications. Cora socialized with a number of variety players at the time, including Lil Hawthorne of the Hawthorne Sisters and Lil's husband/manager, John Nash. Crippen was sacked by Moyen in 1899 for spending too much time managing his wife's stage career. So this is what I mean. He was so into helping her and doing so much for her career that was just always failing that he eventually lost his job.
Was he tone deaf? Like, did he like, I'm just trying to figure out why he thought that her career would succeed.
Who knows? He did recover. He became a manager of Drouet's Institution for the Deaf, which that leads to your tone deaf thing. Where he hired Ethel Leneuve, a young typist, in 1900. By 1905, he was having an affair with Ethel, and Ethel was more up his alley. Cora was very social, very loud, very into the glamorousness of life. And even though her husband wasn't pulling in as much money and was basically like crippling themselves.
Yeah.
And then she was also just spending all the time and having all these open affairs. And then he met Ethel, and Ethel was more reserved and calm like he was, and more would rather read and do things, like not have to be out in society all the time like this. So very introverted. So,
you know, that actually makes sense. Maybe the reason he was so focused on her career wasn't because he was focused on her career. It might have been an abusive relationship from her angle.
Yeah.
And she was like, you have to do this for me. And then when she started fucking around, her confidence was still higher than his. So he couldn't really do anything about it. He couldn't build up the courage to confront her about it.
So, they lived at a bunch of addresses in London, so I feel like it's a lot of moving around because money's short.
Right.
And the Crippens finally moved in 1905 to 39 Hilldrop Crescent in Camden Road, Holloway, London. So I'm guessing it's like a little neighborhood in London, where they took in lodgers to try and make up for the lack of income. It was said that he spent £50 a year or something like that on rent here, which at the time was like he was only pulling in £150 a year in money.
Geez, that's a third of his income.
Which in today's day and age we can spend like half our income on rent. So he's not doing terribly at the time, but at the same time he's not doing well either.
Don't remind me of today's shitty climate.
So Cora had an affair with a lot of these lodgers. And
if I can't go to them...
In turn, Crippen was still having his affair and took Leneuve as his official mistress in 1908. There was a party at their home.
Is this still the time when mistresses were okay?
Kinda, yeah. But I think it's more because she's so open about her affairs, and she doesn't... I don't feel like their relationship was super loving.
Right.
So I feel like she was just like, you're the money. He was just her like workhorse, like her money horse, and then he was just devoted to her career. But I think that's because of the control she exerted.
Right.
So she was just like, you can have what you want. I'm already getting everything I want. You can just have her and be done with it.
At least it wasn't completely one way.
Yeah. So after a party at their home on the 31st of January 1910, Crippen basically, Crippen was being asked questions about where Cora had gone to because she hadn't been seen in a little while. Over the next week or so after this party, which the party had ended on a very sour note because partway through the party, one of the guests needed to go to the washroom, and instead of showing the man where the washroom was, he simply gave him directions. And Cora belittled Crippen for this in front of all their party guests.
Okay.
So he was like down the hall over here or whatever, and she was like, you're not a real man because you didn't walk him over there, and like...
He was a real man because he asked for directions. Fuck you.
So, over the next week or so, people began to ask where Cora had gone to, and Crippen had said that she had gone to America. But then his story started to change, that she had fallen ill, and then eventually he told people that after the illness, she had passed away. And a lot of people would have just accepted this, except for the fact that Ethel Leneuve was living there and had started wearing some of Belle's jewelry and had officially moved into the house. And she was even wearing like Cora's furs and things like that. So not things that Cora would have openly allowed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So friends grew really suspicious and passed their suspicions on to the police. And on the 8th of July, Chief Inspector Walter Dew called at the Hilldrop Crescent, where he found Ethel alone. Crippen was at work, So Dew visited him there, and the two returned together to the Hilltop residence, and Crippen happily showed the officer around the house. Nothing to hide. So he also told Dew a different story. He said that Cora had left him for another man, most certainly Bruce Miller, an American that she had met in late 1903. Dew told Crippen that it would be a matter of Cora just confirming this story, because Crippen said that the story about the illness and her dying was more of something for him to save face.
Okay.
So they're like, basically the inspector was just like, well, if you just tell him, like, get her to contact us, it'll be fine. And he walked away, thinking that it was good, because Crippen said that he would place some advertisements in certain newspapers and ask her to make contact. So from there, they probably would never follow it up. Except Crippen made a really bad decision. The next day after this happened, Dew actually stopped by the residence again to find out to confirm a few details of the story, just to be able to put it in his report and be done with it. And it appeared that Crippen and Ethel had vanished. So Crippen had...
The house was the murderer all along.
So Crippen had shaved off his distinctive mustache, and with Ethel disguised as a boy, they traveled to Brussels. They bought...
I pictured he shaved his mustache and stuck it on her face.
Wow.
I know how to do this.
So, they then bought tickets for a passage to Canada, traveled to Antwerp, and boarded the SS Montrose, traveling as father and son. So
that's how it is in this family.
Yeah. So Inspector Dew had returned to the Hilltop residence again and was surprised to find them not there, and decided to make another routine search of the house. And in the cellar, he noticed some loose bricks on the floor, and officers were ordered in to make a more thorough search, and beneath the bricks they found the remains of a body. The body was headless, limbless, boneless, a little more than pieces of flesh, but they reported that it was female.
It was just a torso?
Essentially. But there's no bones.
Wait.
It's just basically pieces of flesh.
Oh.
So one piece of the flesh was found in a shallow grave with a born scar, and medical records showed that Cora also had the same scar on her lower abdomen. So they were basically completely convinced that this was Cora, especially because of the fact that the remains were wrapped in a pajama jacket, and a tag inside the jacket led to the manufacturers, the Jones brothers, and they confirmed that this particular piece of cloth and pattern were not in use until late 1908, proving that the body had been placed there after that date, and that the scar was consistent with the body of Cora Turner. So, when they had first heard about the disappearance, strongwoman Kate Williams, who was better known as Volcana, had began to make the matter really, really hard with some friends of hers at the Scotland Yard, and that's where Dew was put in as the chief inspector of the case. Walter Dew is actually a really interesting person on his own. He was born in Farcotton in England, North Hampshire, on April 7th, 1863. He was one of seven children to Walt Dew Sr., a railway guard, and his wife Eliza. The family moved to London when he was 10, and as a boy he was a natural scholar. As a youth he found employment as a solicitor, so he would work with defense lawyers and so on like that. But he didn't like this work and eventually became a junior clerk at the office of a seed merchant. Later, he followed his father on the railways, and then he became a porter at the Hammersmith in London. And then he joined the Metropolitan Police at the age of 19. And he was actually posted onto the case as a very early investigating officer of Jack the Ripper. So,
whoa! Bam, bam, bam! Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. He was married to a woman named Kate Morris, and they had 6 children, one who died in infancy. Like I said, he was on the Jack the Ripper case. In his memoirs, published 50 years later, after the Jack the Ripper case, he, in 1938, he made a number of claims about being personally involved in the investigation. He claimed to know Mary Jane Kelly by sight, so because she was a very well-known prostitute out there. So,
is he who the main character of From Hell is based off of?
He's just one of the investigating officers.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because I don't. That's a lot of that is I know is based off the Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. So he did write a lot in his memoir about finding bodies and so on, and how he stated that Emma Smith, the first Ripper victim, was often contested by Ripperologists, and he opinioned...
Excuse me?
There's actually an entire study for Jack the Ripper called Ripperologists.
Yeah. Okay.
So he stated the opinion that someone, somewhere, shared Jack the Ripper's guilty secret. In 1898, so 10 years after the Jack the Ripper case, he was promoted to inspector and transferred to Scotland Yard. And he just kept rising the ranks, became an inspector first class, then moved to the E Division, became chief inspector, which is when we catch up to him. Eventually, he would have 130 recommendations and rewards and become a commissioner to the Metropolitan Police, judges, and magistrates. So he's a very important person.
So, is it a university course?
There's actually a university course.
Oh, really? Ripperology, eh? Yeah. 101?
Yep. So, he was also involved in a international jewel thief case of William Johnson, known as Harry the Valet, and he was actually important in bringing him to justice. Johnson stole jewelry that was worth £30,000, and this is in 1898, so... from Mary Caroline, the Dowager Duchess of Sutherland, while she was traveling by train from Paris to London with her husband, Sir Albert Rowlett, Member of Parliament, and her brother, his wife, and the Duchess's footman and maid. So a lot of people in this, and he managed to steal this stuff. Dew investigated the case together with inspectors Walter Dinney and Frank Frost.
Now, I think I got a little lost somewhere.
With the Ripperologist?
Because of the Ripperology. Are we back on the original case now?
No. We're talking about another case that he had solved that was a little bit, it just shows how outside the box he thinks.
Okay.
So, despite the fact that they had managed to get away with it, Johnson was served a 7-year prison sentence and refused to disclose the whereabouts of the Duchess's jewels, and only £4,000 worth were ever recovered. So even though he had managed to effectively find the guy, they only managed to find £4,000 worth of the jewels. So somewhere out there's 26,000 of jewels unaccounted for. So,
well, I bet it's been accounted for in some way or another by now.
So, like I said, Crippen had admitted to Walter Dew that he had fabricated the story about his wife dying, explained he made it up to avoid a personal embarrassment, and that she had fled with Bruce Miller. Dew was satisfied, and then this whole thing when he fled off and got on a ship going to Canada happened, and so by their disappearance doing this really brought them to finding the flesh, and the flesh is wrapped in that pajama jacket, and the pajama jacket could only have been made after 1908, so you can't be like, well, it's an older body or something. No, it really places a lot of when they were living in the house. Mm-hmm. So what ended up happening was William Wilcox, or how he would later be known, Sir William Wilcox, who was a scientific analyst for the Home Office.
Sir Willie Richard Cox.
He found traces of a common drug scopolamine? Scopolamine? In the torso parts.
Scopolamine.
Yeah. So, he found it in the torso parts. And so, essentially, what they theorized happened was that he had poisoned her with this drug to make her, like, basically subdue her. And then either she died of the overdose and then he chopped her up, or he just, once she was incapacitated, he killed her. Because they're viewing him as a really cowardly person.
Okay.
Which, when you kind of flee all the time.
when you randomly disappear.
Yeah. So, as I said, it was basically all skin. No head, limbs, or skeleton were ever recovered.
That's kind of, like, really disturbing. Like, I assume there's organs, too?
I think it's just basically flesh.
So, basically, they took the torso and skinned her.
Yep. Basically filleted her apart.
Jesus.
So,
Christ, Dick.
Crippen and Leneuve were crossing the Atlantic on the Montrose, with Leneuve again disguised as his son. Well, had they gone with a second-class or third-class ticket, they would have probably gone unnoticed. But Dr. Crippen being Dr. Crippen, he got a first-class ticket. And Captain Henry George Kendall, of the ship of SS Montrose, liked to frequent with the first-class people because they're important people, and he liked to be important as well, so he liked to basically have dinner with them and keep eyes on them.
Yeah.
He was also really, really into the news back home, so he had a telegraph system installed inside of the ship.
Ah, now we're coming full circle.
So there were, in the transmissions of descriptions fitting both Dr. Crippen and Ethel Leneuve. And he found that they really did look a lot like it, especially because Ethel, despite being disguised as a boy, looked very feminine. So he had also caught them at one point. He had caught Ethel squeezing the doctor's hand, and he found this to be inappropriate of a thing that a son and father would share.
Sorry, I had this cartoonish moment where he's trying to discern if she's really a boy, and it's just a woman in a full gown wearing a mustache and like a hat, and it's
So
he looks pretty feminine. I don't know.
So, just before steaming beyond the range of his shipboard transmitter, he had telegraphist Lawrence Ernest Hughes send a wireless telegram to the British authorities.
Is that the verb for it?
No, telegraphist, but it would be also telegram is the verb for telegraphy.
Oh, okay.
So he sent a wireless telegram, and this is how it reads to the British authorities. Have strong suspicion that Crippen, London cellar murderer, and accomplice are among saloon passengers. Mustache taken off, growing beard. Accomplice dressed as boy. Manner and build undoubtedly a girl. Stop. Had Crippen traveled third class, he definitely would have been noticed. Second class, definitely would have been noticed. First class, completely noticed. So, Dew boarded a faster White Star liner, the SS Laurentic, and the White Star line is actually what built the Titanic.
Oh, so you know it's good quality stock.
Yeah, so he boarded it in Liverpool and arrived in Quebec, Canada, ahead of Crippen, and contacted the Canadian authorities. And at the time, Canada was still part of the British Empire, so he's within his dominion and within his rights to investigate the crime and apprehend anybody. So when they came into the St. Lawrence River, Dew was disguised as a pilot, and if Crippen, an American citizen, had sailed to the United States, even if he had been recognized, he would not have been able to be extradited. But because he came to Canada, they were able to get him, and he was basically invited by Kendall invited Crippen to meet the pilots, and when they came aboard, Dew removed his pilot's cap and said, "Good morning, Dr. Crippen. Do you know me? I'm Chief Inspector Dew from Scotland Yard." After a pause, Crippen replied, "Thank God it's over. The suspense was too great. I couldn't stand it any longer."
What? It's like he was watching a TV show. I had to know if they were going to catch me.
He then held out his wrists to be handcuffed. Crippen and Leneuve were arrested on board the Montrose on 31st of July 1910. Crippen was returned to England on board the SS Megantic. In his 1938 memoirs, Dew recalled, quote, "I had landed on July 29th by the liner Laurentic, arriving 2 days before Montrose, which was already well out of the Atlantic when we first suspected that Crippen was aboard, but which was a much slower vessel than the mail steamer Laurentic." So this is like a mail ship that he was on. Old Crippen took it quite well. He was always a bit of a philosopher, though he could not have helped being astounded to see me on board the boat. He was quite likable chap in his way. Much of my time in Canada was spent evading reporters and cameramen who knew all well about my arrival in spite of our efforts to keep it secret, and who frequently became personal when I did not give them a statement. As it happened, Crippen and his companion, Miss Ethel Leneuve, showed no desire to postpone our departure and waived their extradition rights, which enabled us to make the return journey after only being in Canada for 3 weeks.
So it seems like even though they got away, they didn't really want to get away.
Yeah, it's weird, eh?
Like I guess maybe the suspense was just, we're waiting on the boat to see if we'll escape or not. Like, this was our only trip. We're gonna get to Canada. We're gonna see if gets there. Oh, the suspense was killing me. Like, the trip was just too long.
So, Crippen was put on trial at the Old Bailey before Lord Chief Justice Lord Alverstone.
Lord
Chief Justice Lord Alverstone.
How pretentious can you be if you have the word Lord in your name twice?
On the 18th of October 1910, the proceedings would last 4 days. The first prosecution witnesses were pathologists, including Bernard Spilsbury, who testified that they could not identify the torso remains or even discern whether it was male or female. However, Spilsbury found a piece of skin from which what he claimed was an abdominal scar that was in Cora's medical history. Large quantities of the toxic compound scopolamine were found in the remains, and Crippen had bought the drug before the murder at a local chemist. Crippen's defense, led by Alfred Tobin, maintained that Cora had fled to America with another man named Bruce Miller, and that Cora and Halley had been living in the house since only 1905, suggesting that the previous owner of the house was responsible for the placement of the remains. The defense asserted that the abdominal scar identified by pathologists was really just folded tissue, for, among other things, it had hair follicles growing from it, something scar tissue could not have. Spilsbury noted that the sebaceous glands appeared at the end and not in the middle of the scar. So other evidence that was presented by prosecution was a piece of man's pajamas, like we said, a pair Cora had given Crippen a year earlier. The pajama bottoms were found in Crippen's bedroom, so they found the matching pajama bottoms to the top. Fragments included the manufacturer's label. Curlers, bleached hair consistent with Cora's were found in the remains, so they found her hair. Testimony from the Jones brother representative, the store that the pajama top fragment came from, stated that the product was sold not prior to 1908, thus placing the date of the manufacturer well after the period that they would have occupied the house. So, it really doesn't look good here.
No, I'm surprised he's trying a defense, considering it seems like he just didn't want a defense.
Yeah. So throughout the proceedings and at his sentencing, Crippen showed no remorse for his wife, his only concern for his lover's reputation. The jury found Crippen guilty of murder after just 27 minutes of deliberation. Leneuve was only charged with accessory after the fact and acquitted. After the trial, Leneuve traveled to Toronto working as a typist, where for 3 years before returning to London under the name Ethel Harvey. While she worked at Hampton's furniture store, she met and in January 1915 married Stanley Smith, whom she had 2 children with. They lived in Croydon, where Ethel died in 1967. So Crippen never gave any reason for killing his wife. Several theories were proposed. One was by notable barrister Edward Marshall Hall, who believed that Crippen had used hyoscine on his wife as a depressant or anaphrodisiac. But
having a great time with these words.
But accidentally gave her an overdose and then panicked when she died. So they're starting to be like, it might have been an accident. Like, he wasn't really, like, trying to kill her.
Regardless, he ran and he's going to be charged for, at the very least, manslaughter. I'm not sure if that's a thing yet.
Well, the thing is, too, even if he had killed her by accident with these things, like an overdose, like an accidental overdose, his homeopathic, doctor, he has those credentials from the U.S. He could have just been like, I was treating her the same way I treated her in the States, and that would have been a much more explainable thing than she fled to America with her new lover and
it must have been panic, right? Like you've never killed anyone before, and then just.
So it is said that Hall declined to lead Crippen's defense because another theory had been propounded. In 1981. A British newspaper reported that Sir Hugh Rice Rankin claimed to have met Ethel Leneuve in 1930 in Australia, where she told him that Crippen murdered his wife because she had syphilis. So Crippen was hanged by John Ellis at Pentonville Prison on 9 a.m. on Wednesday, the 23rd of November, 1910. So he was convicted at the end of October and hung at the end of November. Like I said, Leneuve went to the United States and then Canada and then came back, died. At his request, Crippen had a photograph of Leneuve placed in his coffin and buried with him.
That's oddly sweet and weird.
Yep.
All at the same time. So,
Inspector Dew resigned from the police force and set up as a confidential agent, so basically a private investigator. In 1911, he brought libel action against 9 newspapers for comments they had printed about him during the Crippen case. Most were settled at a court, and Dew won his case against those who did not, resulting in his being awarded substantial sums of damages. After his retirement, he became an unofficial criminal expert for the British press, who would print his comments and opinions into the public eye. He actually had some say on the disappearance of the 1926 crime writer Agatha Christie, which is a whole case on its own.
I didn't even know she had
vanished. It's just like Edgar Allan Poe. Not a lot of people know that his death is really weird and unsolved.
Really?
Yeah.
Intriguing. I guess honestly, in the long run, that's not what they're known for. So you tend to look around it.
So, in 1938, he published his memoirs. What do you think his memoirs are called?
This is,
the Inspector Dew.
Yeah, Inspector Dew.
It's the same memoirs that he mentions being on the Jack the Ripper case. But what do you think it's called?
Give me a second. Climbing the Mountain Dew.
Oh, God. Do the Dew. His autobiography was titled, I Caught Crippen.
What? Just so straightforward. And he was part... That's the important part?
Yeah, that's
not the Jack the Ripper part?
Career.
Yeah.
Not even the fact that he was involved with Agatha Christie. Come on.
Just the one guy he caught.
Yeah. So, This contained factual errors, as many of the events described were being recalled sometime nearly 30 years later, and Dew admitted to this himself in his book. So he even admitted that some of these things might be fucked up because it's been 30 years. However, compared to many of the memoirs written by Dew's contemporaries of the same events, it's broadly accurate.
At least he's straightforward. Like, you try to remember all of this shit 30 years later.
Yeah. Dew had retired and was living at the Wee House on 10 Beaumont Road until his death in 1947. So,
it's just a house with a bunch of slides out all the windows.
Yeah. So the bungalow that Dew retired in was renamed from the Wee House to Dew Cottage in his honor in 2005. So, Dr. Crippen's grave on the Pentonville grounds is not marked by a stone. Tradition has it that soon after his burial, a rose bush was planted over it. Some of his relatives in Michigan have begun lobbying for his remains to be repatriated to the United States. A lot of questions arose about this trial because of the fact that he may not have been guilty. There's some evidence that shows that he may actually not be guilty whatsoever. Lord Alverstone took a lot of unusual steps at the request of the prosecution, so that shows a little bit of favoritism towards the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
And refused to give a copy of the sworn affidavit used to issue the arrest warrant to Crippen's defense counsel. So they weren't allowing them to even the arrest warrant. The judge, without challenge, accepted the prosecution's argument that the withholding document would not prejudice the accused's case, which I think it really does, because if that's the arrest warrant, that's the whole reason we're here.
Yeah, no, that's not how that works. You don't just fucking say, no, this won't be used in court. What are you talking about? This is the reason I'm in court.
Yeah. Yates noted that although Crippen placed the torso in a dry quicklime to be destroyed, he did not realize that when it became wet, it turned to slaked lime, which is a preservative, a fact that Yates used as the plot of his novel, The House That Barry Built. So the guy who's investigating this thing of why the prosecutor would have done this then stated that he used dry lime, which is will destroy the body, and then was like, but because it was in a cellar, it became wet and then turned into a preservative, which that's an interesting thing that I've never known about lime.
Yeah, honestly, how does something go from doing the exact opposite when wet type of thing? Yeah. Like, that's really weird. And I know I should have made a joke about the fruit, but honestly, I wasn't into low-hanging fruit.
Okay. Okay. So, the American-British criminologist Raymond Chandler, which he brings up a fact that I even had to question. He thought it was unbelievable that Crippen could be so stupid as to bury his wife's torso under the cellar floor in his home when he successfully disposed of her head and limbs. So, I have to agree with that. You got rid of the head and the limbs and all that shit. They didn't find a skeleton. Why would you leave one little piece of flesh behind and wrap it in your own fucking jacket?
Unless you wanted to be caught.
Yeah, like... So, another theory is that Crippen was carrying out illegal abortions and the torso was that of one of his patients who died and not his wife. Which, if that's true, he's still fucking dismembered and killed it. Come on!
Are illegal abortions involving, like, cutting out the abdomen? Not just
Don't worry, you won't have to worry about this, baby.
Don't worry. It'll be like a TV screen. We just make a square here. You open it like a door.
So, for this procedure, we're going to have to remove your head.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell?
Remove your head, spine, skeleton. Honestly, we We basically reassemble you without the baby.
But what I also love is that they're making this a theory as to why he's innocent of murdering his wife and why he shouldn't have been imprisoned. He should have fucking been in prison for whoever the fuck he murdered.
He didn't murder his wife. He doesn't deserve to go to prison. He murdered this woman.
So in October of 2007, Michigan State University forensic scientist David Forum claimed that mitochondrial DNA evidence showed that the remains found beneath Crippen's cellar floor were not those of his wife, Cora Crippen. The researchers used genealogy to identify 3 living relatives of Cora Crippen, great nieces, and providing mitochondrial DNA haplotypes. Researchers were able to compare their DNA with the DNA extracted from a microscope slide containing the flesh taken from the torso in Crippen's cellar. The original remains were also tested using a highly sensitive assay of the Y chromosome that found that the flesh sample on the slide was male.
So wait, the flesh in the
flesh in the cellar
was male.
Has a Y chromosome.
Oh.
And did not match any of the DNA that was extracted from her relatives, great nieces, which isn't a great thing, but then the Y chromosome thing really throws us in the ringer.
Yeah, honestly, he probably didn't realize that men don't need abortions.
Yeah. Don't worry, we'll take care of that, baby. So the same research team also argued that a scar found on the torso's abdomen, which the original trial prosecution argued was the same one Mrs. Crippen was known to have, was incorrectly identified. The scientists found hair follicles in the tissue which should not be present in scars, which was used in Crippen's defense at his trial, but then was excused because they said that the glands were around it, not in it. But they're saying that what they found was the hair follicles were in the tissue. So the research was published in the January 2011 issue of Journal of Forensic Science. However, the new evidence for Crippen's innocence has been disputed. English journalist and author David Aaronovic said that, quote, as to the body being male, well, the American team were using special techniques that are very new and done only by this team and working on a single century-old slide described by the team leader as a less than optimal sample. So he's basically being like, they got this fancy new technology.
These kids today don't know what good old police work used to be like. We used to have to hit to the grind and poke everyone to make sure.
And when the team did say that it was a less than optimal sample, they meant for the mitochondrial DNA being able to be linked to her living descendants. However, Florin responded by saying that the tests show unequivocally that the remains were male. So that Y chromosome is easy to find no matter the sample size of the DNA.
Interesting.
So they're basically being like, he said that it wasn't completely optimal, and he's being like, yeah, but my tests prove entirely that it's a fucking male body. Like,
yeah, I kind of want to see what that would look like under a microscope.
Yeah. Traces of the blonde hair found in the curlers at the scene are now preserved at the Metropolitan Police's Crime Museum.
Okay.
Another researcher says that they have asked to be provided with samples from them for DNA testing, but the requests have been denied several times. So they're like, no, we don't want to give you this hair that was found at the scene of the crime.
In all fairness, though, there isn't much DNA in hair.
Yeah.
It's the skin follicle at the end of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the follicles that you need because hair is just protein.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
So, the Scotland Yard basically says was willing to test hair at the scene of the crime for a fee, but it was in turn rejected by the investigators as over the top. So they were like, we're not going to give you this unless you pay us. And then when the researchers were like, no, we don't want to pay for this, that's insane. Why are we paying for this? We're just trying to prove this case. They were like, well, then we're not going to give it to you.
Yeah, we don't want you to prove our case wrong.
Yeah.
We did it. Fuck you, American pigs.
So the researchers have actually have a hypothesis that the police planted the body parts, and particularly the fragment of pajama top at the scene, to incriminate Crippen. So basically, they found him guilty when he fled the country, when he left the country, and was like, you know what? They were like, you know what? We're going to take some flesh from a local graveyard and wrap it in his pajama top.
So now we got conspiracy on this whole thing.
So he suggests that Scotland Yard was under tremendous public pressure to find and bring to trial a suspect for their heinous crime. And independent observers point out that the case did not become public until after the remains were found.
Interesting.
But that actually is kind of backwards, because that strong woman, Volcana, she was putting pressure on the lead of Scotland Yard, Frost. So by her pressuring, she's also a very famous, because she has her own Wikipedia page. So she was probably a very influential person and probably talking about this. I mean, I don't believe that that Cora went to the United States. The funny thing is that there's proof that letters were sent to the jail to Crippen stating, I cannot let you be executed. I cannot let you die for something you didn't do. And it was written in Cora's handwriting. And these letters came from America, but that after he received them, the jailers took the letters. So there's even proof of this in some records, but there's not a lot of it. So it's very possible she just lived out her life.
She genuinely did head to the United States.
Yeah, and he was just trying to save face. So, and he was obviously an anxious person. So when they started investigating him, he probably just panicked and was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to Canada and get her. Like, I'll just go to Canada, come over to the United States and get her. And then once that's done, proof positive, right? Like, he'll just do it himself. Like...
Yeah. At the very least, I would have put the story in the newspaper like the cop asked. So that way, like, it looks like you're at least you're trying to put it out there. But if she is in a different country, the most you can do is go find her.
Yeah.
If the only communication we have is the telegraph, that's not going to get to her in time.
No, and that's what I mean, is they probably would have never looked at this again if he hadn't ran off. So, in December 2009, the UK's Criminal Cases Review Commission, having reviewed the case and all the new evidence, declared that the Court of Appeals will not hear the case to pardon Crippen posthumously. So they're not even willing to look at it.
Well, in their defense, it's a little too late.
Yeah.
Like, the most it satisfies is the people invested in the story, not really... Because Crippen's gone.
Yeah.
He's dead. Like, there's nothing... There's no one to save.
Yeah. And, like, it's the... I found out over time has gone on, they've done a lot of that, trying to, like, reshape the image of people after they've died. And it's happened both positively and negatively. Like, the Canadian cases of, like, Louis Riel, where they retried the case in 2003 and found that he would have not been convicted of treason. But that's putting modern perspectives into cases that are not modern anymore. Like,
yeah, the unfortunate part is, as I was saying, all we were getting is a truth that helps no one anymore.
Yeah, everybody is dead. Like,
yeah. At this point, not even Cora would be around.
Yeah, she'd be well over 100. She'd be well over 100 years old. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, it doesn't help anyone.
No. So that's the whole case of Dr. Crippen.
I hear Dr. Crippen, and I feel like he should have an island volcano.
Yeah. island lair somewhere.
Yeah. It has to be in a volcano, though. How else does he power the volcano, his evil inventions?
Yeah.
That, honestly, I think what got to me mostly was the people at the end who, they're trying to save face for this person.
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
Like, if you're a historian and you're looking into it and you're like, oh, maybe this. So, like, you're just looking at the evidence and stuff like that. Then, you know, it's out of your own interest and whatnot. But, like, if you can't get a hold of it or they need you to pay money for these items, like, honestly, there's don't feel upset because you can't, because it's not going to help anyone in the long run. It's just for your own. It's your own intrigue, your own hobby or whatnot.
Yeah, it's more to just basically, like, I guess, right or wrong without it actually righting any wrongs.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to do anything if you should have wrote the wrong long before the wrong could be written. Wait, yeah. I think that sounds profound. Anyway, I'm going to stop here before I say anything else stupid. All right, well, that was our show. As usual, like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, you know, all the usual stuff that happens between YouTubes and the podcasts. And, you know, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at BAChaosJar. You can follow me on Twitter at I'm Glad You Asked _ Plus, you can go to our Facebook page at Chaos Jar Podcast, which is also the name of our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/chaosjar, throw us a couple bucks, and we'll throw you some cool shit. You know, like, well, more like vocally. Anyway, all in the show notes and more. But that's our show. Have a good night.